Wildlife Service, and I'm the science coordinator for the Desert Landscape Conservation Cooperative. Today I want to talk to you generally about landscape conservation cooperatives, or LCCs, and then specifically about the Desert LCC. I've just started my position a little over 2 weeks ago, so I'm going to ask that you bear with me a little and forgive me if I can't answer every single one of your questions, but give me your contact info and I will be sure to find you an answer. So here's a map of the LCC network nationwide. I think someone already mentioned there's 22 LCCs. The one here in orange across the Desert Southwest is the Desert LCC, encompassing, well, I'll get to the details in a minute. So you're going to hear some common themes here to what you've already heard about the climate science centers. Things about wanting to look at changes in land use, in wide-ranging impacts of climate change, how we can work together to better address these than we could individually. So the LCCs are looking at this, looking at how these broad landscape scale stressors or changes threaten both people as well as the sustainability of native species and their habitats. We are very interested in adopting a science-based, sort of iterative, adaptive management kind of approach to conservation of natural resources. We're also interested in capitalizing on our individual strengths as well as leveraging our collective assets within the conservation and natural resource management community. We've already heard a little bit, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, we've already heard about Secretarial Order 3289, which established the climate science centers as well as the LCCs. So maybe we can make up a little time here. So again, we're looking to address major conservation challenges at broad landscape scales. The LCCs are non-regulatory. Each LCC is a self-directed partnership. So we have a steering committee that sets the agenda, that identifies the priorities for the group. And very interested again in developing that shared science capacity. We want to really link science directly to management issues and management questions to on-the-ground conservation. So what are we doing? As I just said, we want to inform management of natural resources. We want to integrate priority needs across different species groups to identify the most effective conservation approaches to address our shared goals and to identify and hopefully fill any gaps in information and science. We want to augment and draw upon the existing capacities of our conservation partners to avoid duplication through improved conservation planning and design, and to connect our efforts. We really think that this integrated approach will serve us better than individual agencies or organizations working alone. I mean, let's face it, we're in a time of very daunting challenges when it comes to conservation and management of natural resources. Not only climate change, but land use changes. You're all familiar with these stressors. So we really feel that there's some good examples out there, such as the joint ventures looking at bird conservation that have been going for over 25 years and have kind of set a model for partnership groups looking at conservation. And so we're hopeful that we can come together to really make a bigger difference. This sort of thing particularly important in these economic times as well, when we all have decreasing budgets. How can we make sure we're not duplicating efforts? How can we make sure that we have a more synergistic effect in our actions? So some of the key characteristics of landscape conservation cooperatives, We can look at large geographic scales. We're looking across land management boundaries, across state and even international boundaries. We have a very broad taxonomic scope. We're looking to support humans as well as all species of fish and wildlife and plants, habitats. We're wanting to be forward-looking, this sort of idea of adaptation to a changing environment, whether it has to do with climate or other stressors. And as I said, very interested in being adaptive and looking at what are the conservation practices being implemented. How can we look at practice verification and refining what we're doing to constantly improve that. And I'll mention too that the landscape conservation cooperatives, we do have a focus on looking at climate change, but we're not just looking at climate, we're looking at other broad scale stressors. So in looking at the map of the LCCs, I want to mention that like the climate science centers, the LCCs are new. Established through the secretarial order in 2009 and have been rolled out a few each year over the last few years, and they're now all in place. Some of them very new, all of them new, some of them very new. So what we're looking at right now is, because each one is, as I said, self-directed and self-governed, we're looking at how we can interact with each other, how we can create a network so that we can learn from each other and again have this synergistic effect across the entire country, as well as into Canada and Mexico, working with our partners there. We are not looking to replace other conservation partnerships. Here we're highlighting the joint ventures that are focused on bird conservation, but there's other examples, lots of other examples of conservation partnerships out there, and we're really looking to work with them and to enhance what they're already doing, to look at where the gaps are, the information gaps or even capacity gaps, to help with strategic planning, all of these kinds of things. So I want to focus in a little bit on the Desert Landscape Conservation Cooperative. This area of New Mexico, of course, is within our geographic boundary. The mission that's been defined by the steering committee is through collaborative partnerships, provide scientific and technical support, coordination, and communication to resource managers and the broader Desert LCC community to address climate change and other landscape scale ecosystem stressors. Our geography includes portions of 15 states, 5 of which are in the US and 10 in Mexico. We cover 3 deserts, the Mojave, Sonoran, and Chihuahuan deserts. Of course, across this very large area, we have very diverse topography. And several large river systems, including the Lower Colorado, the Gila River, the Rio Grande, the San Pedro, and the Verde River. So in looking at our structure, as I said, we're new, and this is still kind of changing and being defined. So I have a few things to add to this slide from a week. We had a meeting at the steering committee we had a couple weeks ago. But basically, we do have a steering committee in place, and I'll talk about the membership in just a moment. The steering committee provides the overall direction to the group. We have a few staff. We have a coordinator, Genevieve Johnson, who was hired by the Bureau of Reclamation and is housed in Phoenix. She's the overall partnership coordinator, and then I'm the science coordinator, which I was hired by Fish and Wildlife Service. And we provide support and coordination to the steering committee as well as to the working groups. So our biggest working group is the science working group, but then we also have other groups. We have a local governments group, an administrative working group, sort of Mexico working group to act as a liaison to our counterparts and agencies and organizations in Mexico who are interested in participating. We have a tribal working group, and then we have one focused on data and GIS information. And then we've just added a few. We have an outreach and education working group. We have a subcommittee that's going to be providing, there's a conservation group in El Paso and Doña Ana County that are creating a conservation cooperative that would like advice on getting started. So we've created sort of an ad hoc group to help them. And then we also have a subcommittee that's going to be working specifically with the data and GIS information group on database needs. One of our priorities is to share information and to find ways to make information that's already out there available so that people can find it, managers can find it and use it. And so we're exploring different ways to do that. And then, of course, we're interacting with the conservation community as a whole. So we're looking to them, many of them on the steering committee, but also others, looking to them for what their most pressing management questions are. And then wanting to take those questions and create and provide information and products, decision support tools, synthesis documents, things that will be helpful to natural resource managers. So this is just the logos for our various steering committee members. It's quite a big group. Many of them natural resource management agencies, both federal and state. We also have some NGOs and some tribes. And then, of course, Mexico, an agency from Mexico is participating. So we've identified some sort of overarching goals for the partnership under 4 categories. So we have science development and delivery. And our primary goal there is to identify science needs of partners related to climate change and ecosystem stressors at broad spatial scales, and facilitate the development, integration, and application of scientific information that will inform resource management decisions. Another category is collaboration and communication. We want to promote and facilitate collaboration and communication among conservation partnerships and entities to support and add value to their efforts. The next category is monitoring and evaluation. We want to provide expertise and opportunities to enhance and add value to climate change and other monitoring programs of various partners when such actions are mutually agreed to by the partners involved. And then outreach and education. We're interested in providing information and application tools that educate and apprise resource managers and the public about the effects of climate change and other ecosystem stressors. So just to talk about a few of our accomplishments so far, we've created a comprehensive science needs assessment. And we did that by looking at reports that had been produced within the geographic area and had highlighted science or other information needs. We did a series of workshops and also had individual input. We developed a criteria for scoring the science needs and then applied the criteria to sort of narrow in on the highest priorities. The science working group had identified a total of 553 science needs from 6 outreach meetings and 40 published technical documents related to resource assessments in the region. And then the members identified priority needs using a set of criteria that were established by the steering committee in January of this year. And we're now looking at taking that comprehensive science needs assessment, creating a mechanism for taking in additional needs, ongoing needs from resource managers, and creating kind of a system of prioritization. Identify priorities in one year, and maybe fund some projects related to that. And as you bring in information, you're going to learn something, hopefully. and as you learn things, those priorities may change. And so we're looking to put in systems and processes but that we can use as an iterative process, that we can be adaptive in how our partnership functions. Primary funding that's been directed for the Desert LCC has come through the Bureau of Reclamation, the largest sum of money through them, and then a little bit through the Fish and Wildlife Service as well. Some of that supports the staff, and some of it has been used for funding opportunities. The Bureau of Reclamation has done they don't call it an RFP, they call it an FOA, Funding Opportunity Announcement, but essentially the same thing. And then last year they also did an SOI, a Statement of Interest, that made funds available to other federal entities. So the Bureau of Reclamation is leading the Desert LCC, as well as the Southern Rockies LCCs, and provided $1.2 million in funding for 9 projects between those two LCCs in fiscal year 2011. Yeah.
The funding for the LCCs for the desert specifically, does that require match money?
It does.
Non-federal match money?
Yes, it does. Good question. And then in this year, they provided $1.7 million and funded 12 projects. And then almost $500,000 to federal agencies through the SOI.
So for the funds for the federal agency, how are they, is that also Bureau of Rec money?
Yes.
So how does that work? Because we can't match. Is that just money directly to the other federal entity? Because I don't think they can match. I can't match Bureau of Rec money being USGS.
I can't remember the specific details of, I think there was some sort of, I can't remember on that one exactly how that was worded. But
I mean, just as a community, we'll need to think about that, because there are definitely rules on where money comes from and what you can match and what you can't. And because with one of the other LCCs, when I was at the Water Science Center, I applied to the RFP, and those funds, there was no match. It would have just gone from Fish and Wildlife to USGS for a particular project that they needed.
And that may be how this was set up too. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
But it just recently been aware that some of the funding for the LCCs is actually coming through Bureau of Rec. I thought it was
right.
Fish
So
and Wildlife.
Most of the LCCs across the nation are being led by Fish and Wildlife Service, and there's a few that BOR has the leadership role, is kind of co-leading with Fish and Wildlife Service.
I think Reclamation's got 2 pots of funds. One of them went out to interagency agreements, and the other one out to the outside.
Right. But the interagency agreements, there was a specific notice that came out and criteria that you had to meet and everything.
Yeah, separate, kind of 2 separate processes.
Yeah, they set it up separately, yes. And this is not to say this is exactly how it will be done in subsequent years either. We're trying to kind of think outside the box and be creative in how we fund projects. So this is, they're planning for an FOA in this fiscal year. I would be looking for the announcement probably in March or April. That's tentative. I'm just starting to plan the cycle of funding. So I want to give a few examples of some of the projects that have been funded through the Bureau of Reclamation money. But I also want to point out that we're at a point now with the steering committee of the Desert LCC where partners other than Bureau of Reclamation and Fish and Wildlife Service are bringing things to the table where not necessarily a pot of money, but they're offering staff time or other kinds of resources to the collective effort of the LCC. So it's really interesting to see how the partnership is starting to develop and how different partners can contribute in different ways. So just a few examples, and I know we're a little bit behind here, so I'm just going to go through these quickly, and I can provide you more information if you're interested. They're also on the website. So one of the projects funded through the Bureau of Reclamation money was predicting effects of climate change on riparian obligate species in the southwestern United States, which went to Northern Arizona University. They're looking to link various hydrologic, geomorphic, and habitat models to better understand and predict how climate changes will affect critical riparian ecosystems and wildlife in the region. Another one is a Seeps and Springs Inventory Assessment and Management Planning Project that the Sky Island Alliance is leading. And they are looking to develop new information regarding the current biology and management status of springs and seeps on the Sky Islands region of southeastern Arizona. Newly collected assessment information will be combined with the existing data in the region through an online database. This is a really interesting project that's using a lot of volunteer work. It's really interesting how they've got it set up. Another project is defining ecosystem water needs of the Upper Gila River and assessing the impacts of climate change, being led by the Nature Conservancy. And then vulnerability of riparian obligate species in the Rio Grande to the interactive effects of fire, hydrological variation, and climate change. And the U.S. Forest Service's Rocky Mountain Research Station is doing that project. This fiscal year, the Fish and Wildlife Service had a little bit of money to put towards projects as well. And so far we've funded 2 projects. We wanted to, USGS was doing some Seeps and Springs research, and so we added to their effort so that they could expand that with the idea of supporting restoration of habitat for desert fish and other aquatic resources. We've also put some money in to expand an avian climate change vulnerability assessment that was being done in California to include the Sonoran Desert landscape, was being done in the Sonoran Desert in the U.S. and we'll be expanding that into Mexico now. So some of our next steps, USGS, Mark Sogi is on our steering committee, and he is looking to lead a series of science roundtables to further refine and understand science needs and gaps on specific topics of high priority. I think those are going to be very interesting. We're looking at ways to better connect natural resource managers and scientists and really get a two-way communication going. I think those are going to be really interesting. If you have an opportunity to participate in one or interested, I would encourage you to do so, or let me know if you're interested. As I said, we had a steering committee meeting a couple of weeks ago in El Paso, and we identified some priorities for our annual work plan. So myself and Genevieve are working on putting a timeline to that, figuring out who's going to do what and how we're going to get these things done. With really a focus on providing some products, on increasing capacity for ourselves as well as other partnerships working on conservation in the region, and really starting to find ways to bring information, to communicate science information to broader audiences, to make information available, and to create some specific decision support tools. Yeah, we're working on a new website. I think I covered the communicating results of funded science projects. So here's our contact information and our website. The website is, as I said, in the process of being updated and revamped. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
A significant part of the LCC is in Mexico, right? So is there, how much, are there funds, can the partners be in Mexico? You know, funding, can money be transferred to Mexican?
Well, actually the Bureau of Reclamation does not have authority to spend money in Mexico, but the Fish and Wildlife Service does. So we're really looking for...
So it depends on who you work with another project fund and say, if one of the projects involved a significant, sorting of the universities in Mexico, in different states, how would that work, going through Fish and Wildlife?
Yeah, right. So the Bureau of Reclamation, FOAs and SOIs, but there's potential that the Fish and Wildlife Service money, depending on the year, how much money we have and what the priorities are that year. Like I said, one of the projects we put money towards this year was to expand work into Mexico. Mm-hmm. We have recently set up a Mexico working group that's looking at ways to collaborate more with Mexico. Our primary partner in Mexico right now is INE, the National Institute of Ecology, and they have a member, Eduardo Peters is on our steering committee, and then Margarita Caso is on the science working group. And we're looking for ways to collaborate and to work with our colleagues in Mexico. But it's, as I said, it's still being explored and defined. The nature of a startup.